So some of the ideas that I'm going to be presenting today, or most of the ideas, are kind of still in flux. And I hope that you can kind of bear with me, and I'm going to be rambling a bit, but I think that there's something interesting here, and I hope that this kind of invites conversation subsequently, and I think that Primavera's presentation and Rob's presentation subsequent to this should elaborate some of this material too. So yeah, for the cover slide, I selected this image. It's a Stephen Willits artwork that was produced in 2008, and he was looking at the financialization of London at the time by doing these kind of ethnographic studies of individuals that worked in the financial industry and kind of looking at relationships, their relationships with one another, mostly men, and to kind of society at large. So it's just kind of an important work for me because he's really examining these close affiliations and like what makes up this culture. And I think that the blockchain community could also use to do some of this. So for context, a little bit about myself. I'm not really going to be talking about my work per se, but just set myself up a bit. So I have a background in computational genomics and cell engineering. I work at Sloan Kettering, which is a cancer research facility. I also have done a fair bit of work in molecular simulation and kind of statistical modeling. And I have a passion for artist publishing and curation. And my passion project is kind of, I use avant.org and this artist project, artist library, cybernetics library as a venue for organizing and doing artist projects. And then as of recently, throughout my work with the magazine, we've kind of addressed technoculture and the politics of technoculture. So that is coming from a kind of critical lens, and I think that set me up well to start thinking about blockchain systems, which are kind of envelop a lot of socio-technical systems into one package. And so as of recently, I've been doing some independent consulting for several blockchain organizations, kind of doing some technical design and editing of their like founding documents, which has been quite interesting, moving from the kind of critical side into the design and thinking about what these systems could be and framing them. What I'm going to be talking about mostly today are like the metaphors that are involved in the crypto space. So there are quite a few of them. As I mentioned, I think one of the kind of notable things about the blockchain industry is that it seems to be impenetrable for a lot of people. There's a high learning curve, and so maybe for that reason, maybe for other reasons, there's a lot of it tends to produce a lot of metaphors. People map things onto it. So I'm just going to kind of pick a few of those and discuss them. But yeah, in terms of what is a blockchain? Well, it's a protocol, it's a market, it's a network. It kind of looks like accounting, kind of looks like a government, kind of looks like a city or an ecology. It looks like a clock. They look like memes. They look like currencies. And then, the things that you make with blockchains, smart contracts. The kind of canonical metaphor is of a vending machine. That's Nick Szabo's framing. But perhaps their laws or self-executing programs. And then DAOs, which are collections of smart contracts along with the individuals that kind of operate those smart contracts. They could be corporations, maybe, or communes, or forests in the case of Terra Zero, or superorganisms of some kind. So, and I'm going to talk about clocks first, because I think that's kind of just one of the most interesting ones. And then I'm going to kind of mostly discuss this ecological metaphor, and then I'm going to talk about governance a little bit, and hopefully that'll lead into Primavera's talk a bit. Okay, so proof of work is a decentralized clock. This was, I don't know, I think this is one of the most helpful metaphors for actually understanding what a blockchain is, and I don't think it's like conveyed enough. But basically, many people here will already know this, but essentially the kind of what proof of work gives us is a consensus time. More specifically, it's a shared understanding of the order of events. And once you have that, you kind of get everything else for free out of that. So I have been collecting these kind of blockchain one-liners. Like, how do you explain a blockchain in like one sentence or one tweet? And I just think it's kind of a fascinating practice of like trying to compress such a complex subject into like a single, a single sentence. And so I have a whole list of these, and they get pretty interesting. But this is my half-hearted attempt here for Bitcoin. Shared ordered record that's published at a controlled rate. So it's like trying to just compress that as much as possible. And also frames blockchains and these kind of crypto systems within the narrative of publishing, which is something that I'm particularly interested in. So these are like immutable publications. And sorry, the image here is the Bitcoin block generation, or it's basically the difficulty adjustment of Bitcoin. And how Bitcoin works is every 2016 blocks, the network basically assesses how much work has been done, and then changes the difficulty automatically. So it's a self-regulating system that ensures that the clock rate, the publishing rate, is kind of statistically within some boundary. So it's roughly periodic. And just to kind of extend the metaphor to biological systems, this is the pulse synchronization model of a Malachi firefly. And this is, I pulled this from a paper where these individuals are trying to kind of refine and make a better consensus system using fireflies and other biological clocks as a template. And just thinking about the kind of importance of clocks in the kind of growth or in biological systems, we see these all the time. So, all organisms are self-regulating on some kind of periodic cycle. So they have some like homeostatic clock that's internal to the organism or internal to a community. So like circadian rhythm, your like daily cycle. In the case of fireflies, these are they have the lighting mechanisms that the bioluminescence that they give off. They use that as a kind of tool to synchronize and find one another. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit about, the kind of relationship between energy and money. So if we're going to make this metaphor where a biological system looks something like a blockchain, then the fuel for that is capital or some kind of incentive mechanism. And so let's try to kind of equate these with one another. So money, kind of by definition, has to be difficult to produce to prevent counterfeiting. And proof of work basically makes this energy trade-off explicit by burning energy in order to create money. So that is an interesting kind of direct relationship you have. And then I kind of wanted to just have us kind of ponder this this quote from Harold J. Morowitz, which is from a biology textbook originally, but actually made it into the inside cover of the last Whole Earth catalog in 1971. The flow of energy through a system acts to organize that system. And I think that very much frames scientists thinking about biological systems, but also frames how capital flows within a capitalist system. So, financial thermodynamics. You'll actually see a lot. So, just a kind of anecdotally, you'll see a number of physicists and people who've worked in thermodynamics like working in the finance industry because they use like similar kind of modeling techniques. The actual kind of term of thermoeconomics, which I'm grabbing here, it's a bit, so as described here, it's a heterodox economics. It's a bit of a kind of side discipline, but that thinking actually crosses over quite a bit. And historically, there have been quite a few parallels made between thermodynamics, some kind of like fundamental chemical or physical system that governs the kind of mechanics of life and economic principles. So, and I also just thought this diagram was really excellent. So you can see the financial flows in the center is kind of like running everything. And you have solar energy in and then heat out. So this is kind of a self-contained system that, that is the Earth and economy and society and everything that kind of functions within it. Okay, so if energy is somehow equated with money, then now we can talk about ecologies being equated with markets. And I just want to preface this by saying that this is a really uncomfortable comparison for me. And the reason for that is that I think that it enshrines kind of capital and capitalist systems within this perceived like natural order. It naturalizes in a way that we need to be very careful with. However, there are resemblances that we I think need to be discussed because our thinking with one has at least informed how we've constructed markets and think about markets. And blockchains are markets. So yeah, this is just in the corner here. This is 10 seconds of trading on BlackBerry. It's like a high frequency trading visualization. At one point I was doing some kind of deep dive into the time scale of high frequency trading, which is pretty fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of background here on how one might make this comparison between markets and ecologies. So disruption theory, for those who are not familiar with it. So the main idea here is that a product or service begins with a simple application at the bottom of a market, and then moves up market to displace established competitors. And the idea is that there's basically this, this modulation between an interdependent and a modular system. Modular system is one that can be pulled apart, kind of composable, and it has the features described here, so standardized. It's kind of optimized for price and speed, and then typically what happens in this framework, the disruption framework, is that a modular system can be overtaken by an interdependent system, so kind of a monolithic framework. And one of the canonical examples of this is the Windows operating system and the browser specifically. So in the case of the Windows ecosystem, Microsoft was kind of exerting control over the entire operating system. And in this case, so that's an interdependent kind of vertical stack. They have everything. And in this case, the browser became a kind of a modular, or a point where a modular system could kind of intervene. So code can run in the browser, and what happened was that all of the applications that people started caring about lived in the browser. So it basically abstracted away the entire computing ecosystem, so that it didn't matter what operating system you're running. It matters what's in the browser. So the idea is that you can kind of work along another dimension of abstraction that's just not accessible to the other system. So this is how these things kind of like flip in this competitive environment. And yeah, just a little background on positive and negative selection, like from putting my biologist hat on. So there's two ways that selective pressure is kind of modeled in biological systems, and that is positive and negative selection. So positive, or Darwinian selection, is the selective advantage of a particular trait that kind of grows within a system, becomes fixed. And negative selection is its opposite, where there's some feature that slowly gets weaned out of the system and cleared. Okay, so this is a kind of rough model of how biodiversity is kind of maintained within a biological ecosystem, how you maximize for biodiversity. And this is still like quite theoretical. There's a lot that's not within this model, but I think it's a useful kind of discussion point. So basically, there's two components. There are, competition and evolution are like as you're modeling these things with some kind of agent-based system, those are the two factors that you need in order to maximize biodiversity. And the thinking here is that as one species forces out its competitors, the expansion of this fit species allows for its predator populations to rise, regulating the population. So as this population of predators grows, as one organism population grows, the predators also are able to grow because there's more food available for them. And then that is a negative feedback loop that maintains the population size. And then there's an evolutionary pressure to evolve away from that, so that increases biodiversity. Okay, so I'm going to go back in time a little bit and talk a bit about this this document, which I think is, Cyberspace and the American Dream, the Magna Carta for the Knowledge Age. So basically this was a document that, this was a document that really came from some of the kind of countercultural ideology of those kind of the melting pot for Silicon Valley, and became a framework for some of the kind of regulatory environment for telecommunications industry. And so I'm just going to read a little quote from that. I'm sorry, this is a quote from Counterculture to Cyberculture, which is commenting on that document, which is the manifesto. The manifesto that Dyson went on to co-author extended the cybernetic and countercultural analogies current in the social worlds of the whole Earth and Wired, linked them to a libertarian political agenda, and ultimately used them as symbolic resources in support of the narrow goal of deregulating the telecommunications industry. Cyberspace, the authors explained, was more ecosystem than machine. It was a bioelectronic environment that is literally universal. So, and then this is a quote from the manifesto itself. If there's to be an individual policy for the knowledge age, it should focus on removing barriers to competition and massively deregulating the fast-growing telecommunications and computing industries. What is more, it should allow much greater collaboration between the cable industry and phone companies. The argument that Fred Turner makes from Counterculture to Cyberculture is that basically the framing of this document focused on the wrong actors. So they were kind of encouraging deregulation, and they were encouraging companies to play in this competitive environment. But one of the reasons that I pulled this quote is that it mentions both competition and cooperation. And one of the things that I've been really trying to think through recently is to what extent competition and cooperation are really part of the same system and co-produce one another. And so the idea being, like, if you are cooperating with someone, then you're kind of necessarily competing with others. Like, to what degree is cooperation kind of localized? And I don't really have kind of a full answer for that, but I would like to believe that there's something kind of beyond that one can transcend that cycle. But I think it's important to acknowledge that in many cases, those kind of co-produce and reinforce one another. Also, just digression because I have to. So the author, Esther Dyson here, is the daughter of Freeman Dyson, who's the kind of acclaimed physicist. I think he worked on electrodynamics, and so, Dyson sphere. And I just wanted to kind of call out the Bitcoin Dyson sphere here. Though that's not really, I don't really believe that that's going to happen, but I think it's useful to have a little conceptual break here. Okay, so where does this metaphor break down between ecologies and markets? Then this is an incomplete survey here, but just kind of what I could come up with. So first of all, physical resources don't really map one-to-one in kind of the market logic that we're talking about typically. I did mention that in the Bitcoin network, you're burning energy in order to create a Bitcoin, but money is a conceptual phenomenon. It's a social contract. So there isn't that same kind of one-to-one. I have the resource in hand that, and I can trade it. So also, the choices of kind of within those representative frameworks have externalities that we kind of unintended. And this is really what happened in the case of this kind of first wave of decentralization that I was discussing. They were trying to optimize for kind of the wrong piece of the system by deregulating it. So abstraction is also just something that isn't really, you can't really carry out in a kind of physical system in the same way. So abstraction is like often done, mostly done through symbolic manipulation and language. It has an immaterial quality, and that just means that you kind of get further removed from the object of interest, and you can kind of play a lot of games in the abstract space that you wouldn't otherwise be able to play in the physical one. And then, yeah, aggregation. So like because of this immaterial quality of markets, there's zero marginal cost of resources. Like you can essentially print new money, and at the very least you can print new software, and that can create a feedback loop where the kind of service with the best quality reinforces itself. And so this is kind of what we see with platforms like Facebook or Google. I think Google is the maybe better example. You use Google because it has the best search, and then you give them your information because you're searching things, and that makes the service better. And so the zero marginal cost of acquiring new users becomes kind of the key piece that like wouldn't otherwise be possible in a kind of physicalized environment. And then, yeah, social values. Like when everything is kind of subject to market logic, there's just other things beyond that I care about, that we care about, and those need to be kind of addressed within these systems. So, like natural selection is not something that I want to apply to like all of my social relationships. But this is what blockchain networks are doing. It's like, okay, how do we like make everything into a market? And yeah, so where are like the agents in this system? Where are the people who actually have relationships and want to grow those relationships within these systems? And then, yeah, the kind of notion of a historical record is slightly different in a biological system. So like a genetic makeup is basically the result of these like selection phenomena, and there's kind of an implicit history there rather than this explicit one in the case of a blockchain, but also in the case of like paperwork and other systems that kind of current market frameworks run on. And so this is like really an initial stab at some of these differences, and I would really invite all of you to continue discussing this with me about what these differences are. Okay, so I'm gonna break a little bit and talk about governance and representation a bit for the last bit. So first of all, I spent one of the first kind of blockchain projects that I worked on was an Oracle. And so I did kind of a lot of research about how oracles work, kind of the theorization of oracles within the blockchain ecosystem, which is quite interesting because it just maps well to the kind of scientific lens. And I think I have a kind of unusual take on what oracles are, but I'll kind of take a stab at it here. So, and the reason that I'm bringing this up is because oracles are very much about representation. So oracles make subjective assertions about the world, i.e. representations. That is their main function. And in the blockchain space, like within the blockchain, within the kind of smart contract and internal logic, everything is mechanical. It's just completely deterministic. This is like why a smart contract works. Is everything can be validated, so you can have a kind of internally consistent logic within everything, within that system. What an oracle does is it introduces some kind of exogenous information, and that is not trusted per se. So the main kind of difficulty with oracles is ensuring that that's good information. So a useful oracle, so you can just put garbage into the blockchain, and that's probably what most of the blockchain is. But kind of identifying what good information is extremely difficult, and the way that one can do this is there's two kind of useful paths here. One is to align subjectivity and objectivity, so align some kind of assertion about the world with what's objectively happening in the world, and to do so economically. And that can either be through a centralized oracle, just by ensuring that the oracle wants to maintain its reputation, or by doing it through like a decentralized system, which is an extremely difficult problem, but we're not going to go into that. And then the other is aligning the subjectivity of two different parties. And so this would be, an oracle that basically produces good opinions, or opinions that I trust. And one of the reasons that I bring this up is that in my kind of reading of this, identity is an oracle problem, because it is saying, it is making an assertion about an individual, that I am a certain person, and I am who I say I am, and doing that in a secure and true sense. Okay, so I'm going to actually go back a little bit to the Whole Earth, which is, I'm kind of like a huge Whole Earth catalog nerd, so it kind of makes its way into a lot of my talks. But this is something that I've been kind of concerned about for a little while. So the kind of maxim of the Whole Earth catalog is access to tools, which I think resonates with me and a lot of people. But you can kind of see the kind of libertarian ideology like fall out of this if you like push that idea. So access to tools becomes kind of this self-sufficient behavior, becomes this like liberal individual ideology, and that's not really where I want to be going. There's I think there's a difference between having the ability to kind of sustain yourself and do something, and I think this is also kind of addressed by Ruth the other day. This is the DIY versus do it with others kind of comparison here. I would much more interested in doing things with others for the most part. But this kind of logic of you are the only kind of trusted authority is kind of baked into a lot of these systems. So this is David Chaum, one of the kind of OG cypherpunks, talking. This is kind of the earliest indication that I could find of some of this language. So he's talking about an untraceable electronic mail system in 1981. So the solution presented here can be compromised only by subversion or conspiracy of all of a set of authorities. Ideally, each participant is an authority. So you are your own self-sovereign, person. And I guess just before we move on, yeah, the reason that I'm bringing this up is that in most blockchain systems, a key is kind of the key feature so a key maps to an individual, and that makes very explicit the voting power or the kind of monetary power, or it defines an individual as the kind of most important unit of this system. And I kind of wonder how much room that leaves for more collective action. So yeah, a little bit on designing decentralized systems. So I'm sure everyone will be familiar with this quote, but organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of those organizations. And I've just been thinking about this recently in the context of new blockchains being built, and new layers on those on existing blockchains being built. Because all of this is kind of so new, I think everyone is still figuring out what's going on and how to do this. And I'm not entirely sure that metaphors map exactly, but recently there's been some discussion of the extent to which this kind of maps onto urban planning. This is Shangri-La, which is Corbusier's city, which is kind of famously absolutely gorgeous, but like the unhappiest city in the world. And I think that there is definitely a lot of this going on, and the construction or growth of decentralized systems definitely exists somewhere between like a top-down and a bottom-up behavior. And yeah, just as a kind of case study or interesting example of how these things are kind of mapping onto biological systems or environmental systems is Definity's. Definity's governance system, which they haven't announced too many details about, but basically they have what they call like a blockchain. It's like a brain or something, like an artificial intelligence, they're calling it. But it's basically a directed graph of delegated follow relationships, and then you can basically like instantiate you can kind of follow those relationships, and then those will converge on a single decision, which is an interesting. I'm very interested to see how that plays out. And obviously there's a lot of kind of contention around the extent to which we can actually like design on-chain governance systems. But and another is this kind of speculative avalanche program, a protocol which uses a similar like epidemic model where basically you look at the peers around you and what they're saying, and then you gossip out what that assertion is, and then that just propagates out through the network. So this looks a lot like some kind of viral epidemic, or kind of like a nucleating event within some kind of biophysical system. And yeah, the governance problem. I don't think we know what the basic unit of governance is in a blockchain system yet. We're still kind of figuring that out, and the relationship between kind of endogenous and exogenous governance, and the competition between different chains is going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. But it does look very much like an ecosystem, having multiple chains and interchain protocols and yeah, just contracts that kind of interoperate between different environments. And then, yeah, I guess I want to leave you guys with the kind of question as to whether the choices of representative systems that we're making are really the best ones, and those are, keys for individuals and multi-sigs or DAOs for communities. Those kind of make so explicit the relationships in that network that we may not be leaving room for some of the kind of softer, like, governance and social dynamics that are really at play. Yeah, and then these are some of the issues that one runs into with governance. Anonymity, identity, reputation, these are all extremely difficult problems, or incorporating any of these into a governance system kind of only creates more problems. And then detecting collusion or coercive behavior is extremely difficult, once you introduce anonymity, or you could have someone coercing someone else, particularly with reputation systems. And yeah, incentivized consensus networks are absolutely still susceptible to consolidation of power. We just haven't really seen that play out yet, but there will be kind of a contraction and consolidation. I mean, Bitcoin mining, I think, is a good example, but we'll see many more, I'm sure. Yeah, so this is my last slide, but I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm around blockchains and crypto in general, but it's kind of a lot of enthusiasm from everyone. So, like, anarchists, capitalists, socialists, authoritarians, like, all of these people are looking at crypto, and why are they doing that? Like, it offers some alternative to a status quo that I think we all kind of palpably feel is broken in some way. And there's just kind of wildly speculative claims about that both fuel the industry and capturing the imagination of new developers and artists and everyone. But yeah, I think that kind of also becomes that will eventually become self-defeating in some way. So those claims won't be lived up to. But we'll see some emergence of kind of functional systems that come out of it. But we should kind of acknowledge that these claims are kind of absolutely grand in a way that can't be lived up to. And then yeah, I mean, blockchain is like one of the only viable utopias around, and I think that people are really looking for narratives that they can kind of grab onto and push forward. So I think that it's kind of our responsibility, the people in this room, to help shape those narratives. And yeah, I invite you guys to kind of discuss that and come talk to me. And I hope that the presentations after this also evoke some of these utopias, or at least discuss them in a way that's productive. So thanks very much.